This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
To millions of devout Catholics, he was known as Padre Pio. When he was 31, this humble priest was said to have had an extraordinary vision of Jesus Christ, which many believe left him blessed with the power to heal the sick. Tonight you will meet two people who are convinced that they were cured by miracles. Miracles they attribute to God through the intercession of Padre Pio. In a remote campground area, an off-road enthusiast had a surreal encounter with a beautiful blonde woman and three angry strangers. Little did he know that this curious episode would later make him a key witness in a murder mystery. During World War II, the Lazarus family of Baltimore, Maryland, was told that their eldest son, Sylvan, had died in a plane crash in North Africa. However, 3 months later, they identified him in this photograph of captured American airmen. Today, his relatives are still determined to find out what happened to Sylvan Lazarus. Join me for these intriguing and fascinating cases in tonight's edition of Unsolved Mysteries. In 1987, Pope John Paul II traveled to the Italian city of San Giovanni Rotondo to pay homage at the tomb of one of the most renowned and controversial figures in the history of the Catholic Church. To millions of devout followers around the world, he was known as Padre Pio. He had been born Francesco Forgione in 1887, the son of farmers. You're about to hear the uplifting stories of two people who believe their lives were saved by the miraculous powers of Padre Pio. This is Paul Walsh of Ridley Park, Pennsylvania. In 1983, during his senior year in high school, Paul was so badly injured in an automobile accident that doctors gave him almost no hope of survival. Today, Paul attends college and is recovered completely. When Vera Marie Calandra was 2 years old, her parents were told she only had a few weeks to live. 26 years later, Vera Marie is perfectly healthy and has no traces of the illness that almost killed her. Vera Marie Calandra and Paul Walsh believe they are alive today because they were each blessed by a miracle. Miracles they attribute to God through the intercession of Padre Pio. How did this unassuming priest become known worldwide as a great healer? The remarkable saga of Padre Pio begins in 1903 when he decided to enter the priesthood and dedicate his life to God. 7 years later, in 1910, Padre Pio was ordained at the age of 23. Even then, his extraordinary righteousness and piety distinguished him from the other priests in the friary. But no one anticipated the remarkable events that took place on September 20th, 1918. That morning, Padre Pio was deep in prayer when he experienced what is known in the faith as an ecstasy, a profound vision that many believe left tangible evidence that Padre Pio had been touched by the hand of God.
Crollo nella sua presenza. Per favore, che cosa le vuole da me?
When the ecstasy was ended, he noticed that his hands and feet and side were bleeding. And he had to drag himself to his cell. And there he cleaned his wounds, and he began to sing hymns of praise to God, because of the vision.
These are photographs of the wounds on Padre Pio's hands. Along with those on his feet and side, they are said to generally correspond to the wounds suffered by Jesus on the cross. They are commonly referred to as the stigmata. From the start, some church officials doubted the validity of Padre Pio's claim. They suspected that the wounds had been self-inflicted and called in doctors to examine them. One of the doctors decided to conduct an experiment.
He directed that the friars bandage the wounds and seal them for 8 days so that nobody could open the bandage without being detected. And he felt that after 8 days you would see the beginning of healing in the wounds. And after 8 days the wounds were undressed and they were still the way they were before. There was no sign of healing.
As word spread about Padre Pio's divine revelation, pilgrims began flocking to San Giovanni Rotondo, anxious to be blessed by Padre Pio and bear witness to the miracle of the stigmata.
You had almost like a carnival atmosphere there at San Giovanni Rotondo. People were hawking pictures of Padre Pio. They were dipping pieces of cloth in chicken blood or rabbit blood and selling them as bandages soaked with the blood of the Padre Pio stigmata. That became a problem for the superiors.
The church took drastic action. Padre Pio was sentenced to a sort of internal exile, forbidden to venture into public or conduct any of his priestly duties. The exile lasted 3 years. Ultimately, the Vatican relented, and Padre Pio was restored to his former position, with one exception. He was prohibited from showing the stigmata in public. By his own choice, Padre Pio wore gloves to hide the wounds. As the years passed and Padre Pio's fame blossomed, he developed an international reputation as a man of miracles. The faithful turned to him in droves, seeking divine intervention for their earthly afflictions. Among them were Vera and Harry Calandra of Bartow, Pennsylvania. Their 5th child, Vera Marie, had been born in 1966 with congenital defects of the kidneys and urinary tract. 2 years and 4 operations later, the doctor delivered the worst possible news.
Want my advice? Take your daughter home. Make her comfortable.
What are you saying? You want us to just give up on Vera Marie?
There comes a time.
He came back to us immediately and said, she's in recovery, and we did remove her urinary bladder. Oh, I thought I would pass out. I said, but how will she live without a bladder? He said, she's not going to live.
Vera Marie was fitted with a catheter, but her condition continued to deteriorate. Her parents sought comfort in the church. Mrs. Calandra sent a telegram to Padre Pio, then 80 years old, asking for his blessings. A few weeks later, she says she received a sign that her prayers had been heard.
I was sitting in the living room of my home with Vera Marie sitting on the floor, and suddenly I experienced a most unusual fragrance of fresh roses, something I never experienced before. I had no flowers in my home, yet all around my head was an overwhelming, powerful fragrance of roses. And then suddenly, Padre Pio spoke to me. He said, I want you to bring your little girl to me here in Italy, but do not delay. Come immediately.
On September 1st, 1968, with her ailing daughter Vera Marie and a newborn infant in tow, Vera Calandra arrived in Italy and made her way to the church at San Giovanni Rotondo.
Excuse me. Father, I need to see Padre Pio.
Padre Pio is very weak and sick.
Oh, please, I need to see him right now.
What is the reason? What makes you
Because
special?
my daughter is dying. He told me to come. I need to see him, please. Please.
I call it a visit. Actually, it was a fleeting moment. He was in a wheelchair. We were in the sacristy. He was brought forth in his wheelchair. We knelt before him as we were told to do. He touched my sick daughter on the top of the head, and he didn't even look at me. I was crushed because I thought, here is an expensive trip, came a great distance, my daughter could die, and I have not the chance to speak with him and explain to him the problems that we have at this time and how we're asking him to help us.
The next day, Vera returned and was granted a rare private audience with Padre Pio.
There he was, right in front of me, in the wheelchair. And he put out his hand and touched my sick daughter on the top of the head. I spoke to him through my heart. Please, God, make a miracle so that all the people will believe.
Doctor, you told
2
us
weeks
little
later,
girl was
back in
gonna die.
America, it began to appear that a miracle had indeed occurred.
Change in her condition? Is there anything we can hope for?
This may have no significance whatsoever, but we found what appears to be the remains of a bladder here.
Well,
And I
thought
hit
you
the
removed
ceiling
it.
and said, but doctor, you removed her bladder before we left on our trip. And he said, well, it's there. I don't know what it is, but we'll leave it alone.
I was very, very happy because I figured, well, something did happen, you know? And the doctor says, whatever you're doing, continue to do it.
Padre Pio has affected my life in many different ways. He's brought me closer to God. He's made me survive when I should have been dead. And in a lot of ways, he's always there for me and my whole family.
On September 23, 1968, just weeks after he blessed Vera Marie, Padre Pio passed away. Curiously, after half a century, the stigmata were said to have completely healed during the final days of his life. That same year, to honor their own personal miracle, the Calandra family established the National Center for Padre Pio. The center has worked with thousands who claim to have been healed by Padre Pio's miraculous powers, even in the years after his death. One of the most dramatic cases is that of Paul Walsh. In December of 1983, Paul was rushed to the hospital after a serious car accident. He had crushed his skull and broken every bone in his face. Paul's mother, Betty, remembers vividly.
Mrs. Walsh?
Where are they taking him?
Surgery.
How long is that going to take?
We have to prep him. We have 3.
There really wasn't anything I could do, and I think that there's shock in a case like that where you kind of are in a daze that you can't believe it's happening. All they really said that night was massive facial and head injuries, and the outlook was not good.
I frankly had basically written him off as possibly even living, let alone living normally. And my prognosis for Paul's normal survival was practically 0.
Eventually, Paul developed hydrocephalus and spinal meningitis and lapsed into a deep coma.
At this time, Paul was totally unconscious, burning up with fever. The sweat was just pouring off him. A woman at church gave me a prayer to Padre Pio. When I came to the Padre Pio prayer, I started to say the prayer. Paul's hand came up from his side. Very shakily, he reached toward his forehead. I was shocked. I could not believe it. His hand didn't make his forehead all the way, but he had made the sign of the cross.
With renewed hope, Betty contacted the Padre Pio Center. Harry Calandra agreed to visit Paul in his hospital.
There's been some improvement.
Let us pray.
Harry began reciting a prayer to Padre Pio and covered Paul's head with a glove that had actually been worn by Padre Pio to conceal the stigmata.
Grant us the grace we ask of you.
It was to me as if an electric shock went through Paul. I knew something happened. It was like a sudden jolt. He shook. It only lasted for a second, but he opened his eyes and he looked at me with such clear eyes as he had not done for a long time. But I knew something had happened, even though it didn't seem outwardly. We left, he was still comatose, we left the room. The next day, I waited purposely till in the afternoon, but I knew something would be different.
You're a good kid.
Paul! Hi, Mom. Hey, Scrons, how you doing, buddy?
This is our miracle. What are you doing?
I'm just drawing. What have you been?
Have the doctors been here?
No, a nurse just gave me this to draw.
I couldn't believe it. One of the nurses came running into the room. She was so excited. She said he's been talking all day. I asked the one neurosurgery assistant, who the day before had shown me all the dead brain cells on the CAT scan, what could have happened? I said, you know this was a miracle. And he said, yes, I know.
Other patients I've had that had the same extent of injuries that Paul had are either still in rehabilitation homes or are dead. I've frankly not any scientific basis for explaining why he survived.
When I did come out of the coma, I was wondering what everybody was making such fuss over me for. I guess at the beginning, before I was told what happened to me, I didn't understand what the big deal was.
For Betty Walsh, it was clear that Padre Pio was responsible for Paul's sudden improvement. 2 weeks later, Paul told his doctor an odd story that seemed to confirm it.
He described having a visitor whom he thought was his uncle, but he stated that his uncle was dressed up in a brown robe, and I just thought this might be some kind of hallucination.
But was it hallucination? Not only Paul, but also his roommate reported seeing the mysterious visitor.
Uncle Charlie?
Paul continued to believe the man was his uncle until his mother showed him a folded leaflet that featured a photograph of Padre Pio.
And I brought the picture in and said to Paul, is this who visited you on Easter Sunday?
And I said, yes, it was. That is Uncle Charlie, right? And she had folded the paper down and showed me that it was Padre Pio. And at the time, I was laughing that how could it be Padre Pio? Padre Pio is dead. After they had told me what had happened and all, I believe it was Padre Pio.
Here was a man who lived in the 20th century, who did the same thing as the apostles did, whose ministry confirms the truth of the New Testament. If you asked him, he would say that he didn't believe in miracles. He would say that he didn't work miracles, because everything is a miracle. Everything is the work of God.
Next, a strange encounter in the forest may have been a prelude to murder. The Angeles National Forest, nearly 700,000 acres of wilderness recreation area just 30 minutes outside Los Angeles. For city dwellers, the Angeles Forest is a perfect weekend getaway with plenty of space to be alone. On Saturday, February 29, 1992, a dedicated off-road enthusiast named Jeff was exploring a campground area when his curiosity led him into a mystery.
I've been back in there before, and it was the first time I'd noticed this one little road off to the side. And I was proceeding, God, maybe 100 yards back, if that, and I saw somebody had set up a camp there. As I pulled up, directly in front of me there was a old panel van. To the left of that was a tent. To the left of the tent there was a very attractive girl sitting there by herself. Her hair was done up. It was curly and long. She appeared to have makeup on. She was looking down, and she very slowly raised her head, and we had eye contact.
Look at it, man. What's your problem, man? Man, what's your problem? Yeah, man, look at it, man.
Jeff's side trip had suddenly taken a frightening turn.
What's your problem, man? Get out of here! Leave! Leave! Get out of here!
I never thought about calling the police, nor did I think that these guys were really dangerous to anybody. I thought they were being protective of their camp.
March 3rd, 1993, just over a year later, the Los Angeles County coroner was called to investigate a possible murder site in the Angeles forest. A partial set of skeletal remains had been found approximately 50 yards from the spot where Jeff had seen the young blonde woman. When the coroner checked dental records of missing persons in the Los Angeles area, he found a match. The remains were identified as those of 20-year-old Kimberly Pandilios, who had disappeared a year before. It was a tragic end to a promising young life. Kimberly and her parents had immigrated from Cuba when she was 8. They settled in Pennsylvania, where at the age of 19, Kimberly married. In 1991, she and her husband, along with her infant son, moved to Northridge, California. Kimberly started taking business courses and worked part-time as a model.
Kimberly was a beautiful human being. She was loved by everybody in the family, and she was so sweet, so kind. The very end of her life, I don't want even to think about it.
After the remains were identified, Kimberly's story was covered extensively on the local news. By coincidence, Jeff, the off-road enthusiast, was watching.
TV was on, and I said, that's the girl. That's the girl I saw sitting there. In my mind, there was no doubt that the girl on TV was the same I saw in the camp. Same girl.
Jeff immediately contacted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and accompanied 2 deputies to the spot where he had seen Kimberly. But far too much time had passed. There was not a single clue to the strange disappearance and death of Kimberly Pandilios.
It was close to where that rock right there is.
How had Kimberly come to be in that remote area of the Angeles National Forest? Who were the 3 men Jeff had seen with her? Even though the coroner could not determine the exact cause of Kimberly's death, law enforcement now had no choice. What had begun a year earlier as a missing persons case had become a probable murder investigation. February 28, 1992, the day before Jeff saw Kimberly in the makeshift camp, a burned-out car was found near the Monte Cristo campground section of the Angeles National Forest.
You can see where they torched it from this side.
The fire was started in the passenger compartment on the passenger side of the front seat. We were able to determine that the front seat was pulled forward in a position that would be as if she drove to that location.
Investigators found the charred remains of a spiral notebook in the car, but little else. They ran a DMV check on the plates, but could not reach Kimberly's husband. By the time they did locate him, he had reported Kimberly missing, but a search of the area turned up no further clues. Three weeks later, however, a second notebook, this one Kimberly's day runner, was found under a bridge 2 miles away from the car. The two hikers who stumbled on it turned it into authorities, but the day runner yielded neither fingerprints nor other clues.
Rita, did you talk to Kimberly on Thursday?
Apparently, a third notebook is still unaccounted for. The day after Kimberly was reported missing, her son's babysitter told investigators that a man named Paul had telephoned for Kimberly the day she disappeared.
Do you know Paul?
No, but this Paul called about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He said he had an appointment with Kimberly and he wanted to confirm it.
Did he leave a phone number with you?
No.
What happened after that?
Well, this Paul called again about 7 p.m. Kimberly still wasn't home. He said she'd left her appointment book when she met with him.
The notebook that Paul has is probably the most valuable notebook. That might have her appointments or contacts for later that day. There's a possibility that Kimberly went up into the mountains to meet someone, and that appointment might be in her book.
Kimberly had told her husband that she was scheduled to do an outdoor photo shoot. Authorities believe she responded to an ad in a local newspaper.
A theory is that she drove to that location by herself and met someone to do an outdoor shoot, and that once she was there, she was taken off the road back into the area that she was ultimately found.
Hi, I'm Kimberly.
Ready for a little walk? Come on, let's go! Come on!
I think she was there for at least a day and a half, from Thursday late afternoon, all day Friday, and at least through noon on Saturday.
It was just past noon on Saturday when Jeff happened upon the makeshift campsite.
In retrospect, she might have been drugged, but you just had no idea. If she would have cried out, if she would have said something, if she would have given me an indication she was in trouble, of course I would have done something, but I didn't know. It just gets to me that I didn't do something right then and there to help her. This person basically died because of my inaction or my ignorance. You can't bring the girl back, but I would like justice to be done, of course.
When we return, a rare behind-the-scenes look at the unsung heroes of law enforcement, coroners, investigators. This is a story about the unheralded heroes of law enforcement. When an accident or homicide victim goes unidentified, it falls to investigators from the coroner's office to find out who the John and Jane Does are and how they died. More often than not, these investigators are successful, solving unsolvable cases through a combination of medical expertise, ingenuity, and compassion. October 5th, 1983, Seal Beach, California. At dawn, 2 lifeguards discovered the body of a young boy floating in a channel near the ocean. The body was so badly decomposed that it made identification impossible. Coroner's investigator Joe Lucky was dispatched to the scene. He found no evidence of foul play, In fact, an autopsy would later determine that the cause of death was accidental drowning. But who the boy was and where he had come from posed a baffling mystery. It looked like one of those cases that might never be solved.
It takes a while sometimes to get over the fact that you can't identify these people. You tend to think about your own families and know that there's somebody out there who's missing a relative. Somebody, but we don't know who.
Joe Lucky was used to long odds, and this case would challenge all of his skills. Joe sent a description of the boy to every law enforcement agency in the immediate area. Only one possible match turned up, a boy who had disappeared from Fullerton, California. But Fullerton was 16 miles from where the body was discovered.
The boy is missing here in Fullerton.
Joe Lucky met with the boy's parents. They told him that their son had vanished shortly after leaving for a neighborhood park.
I went over to the park and I found that there was a flood-controlled channel right adjacent to the park. I also discovered that because of the rainfall the day of his missing, that the flood control district had opened a local dam, which is above that area, and allowed the overflow to come through that channel, raising it approximately 6 feet higher than normal.
The mystery had been solved. Tragically, the young boy had fallen into the flood channel and been swept 16 miles to the ocean. Blood samples would later provide a positive identification.
A coroner is probably a good mixture of being a surgeon, a detective, and an attorney. Every day is a challenge that's new, that's a little bit of detective work all the time.
Cullen Ellenberg has worked on literally thousands of cases. Some take months of painstaking research and legwork. Others are solved solely on the basis of one small piece of evidence. That was a case with an unidentified murder victim in 1985.
Checking his clothing items for possibly a name inside, we came upon a buckle that was unique and had the name of a company that manufactures drill bits in Alaska for oil wells on this buckle. Yes, the phone number for the Anchorage Drill Bit Company. We were able to call this company, determine that the buckle, in fact, was an award given to the Employee of the Year, only given out for about 5 years. And with that information, we were able to identify the deceased individual.
But some cases remain unsolved, even after years of investigation. One in particular has haunted Cullen Ellenberg since May 18, 1987. That morning, the body of a woman in her early 20s was found at the base of a steep cliff in Dana Point, California.
What do you got?
Got a girl apparently fell off the cliff.
Any ID on her?
Got a unit up top, but we don't have much more than that.
The woman had apparently plunged to her death sometime during the night.
We weren't sure at that point if it was an accident or intentional or if she had been pushed. I went to the top of the cliff, and there I found a small purse, a half-consumed soda, and a map of Southern California.
Oddly, the purse had no other contents, but the map held a clue which would lead Cullen to the person who may have last seen the young woman alive.
There was a phone number on the map. The phone number was that of a cab company, and the cab company was contacted, and they indicated they had a fare picked up from the area and dropped off at the area of the Dana Point Cliffs at about 3 or 4 that morning.
When Cullen interviewed the cab driver, he described a woman who fit the Dana Point Jane Doe to a T.
You the lady called for a cab?
Yeah. Can you take me to Ross Towers in Laguna Beach?
Sure, no problem.
Can you tell me how much that's going to be?
That'll be $20.
I only have 18. Can you take me as far as that'll go?
Yeah, sure, get in the back.
The only thing the taxi driver said was that she had very little to say other than that. She was very quiet, and he didn't notice anything really unusual about her.
The meter says 18 bucks, man. That's the best I can do.
Thank you.
Good night.
Goodbye.
The next morning, the young woman's body would be found at the base of the cliff. She was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 127 pounds. She had light brown hair, brown eyes, and was wearing what appeared to be secondhand clothing. At the time of her death in 1987, she would have been approximately 20 years old.
This is the first Jane Doe that I've had that I was unable to identify. And I've continued to work this case to today, and occasionally a new lead will come in and I'll follow up, but all to this date have been unsuccessful. There isn't a week that I don't go by the point without thinking about this lady. I want to identify her and find out who she is and who she belongs to.
Despite the sophisticated missing persons computer systems available today, thousands of John and Jane Does across the country remain unidentified. Here are 3 of them. This is a composite drawing of a young woman who in 1990 was struck by a car and killed along the Pacific Coast Highway in Huntington Beach, California. She was in her early 20s, 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed approximately 125 pounds. She had dark brown hair, brown eyes, and severe acne scars. Among the objects found in the woman's possession were a hotel key and a ring made of human hair. In 1976, a young couple was found shot to death on a remote road in Sumter County, South Carolina. The man was approximately 20 years old, 6 feet tall, and weighed around 150 pounds. He had had extensive dental work, which included bridges and crowns. He was wearing an expensive Bulova Accutron watch and a ring inscribed with the initials JPF. The woman appeared to be in her late teens. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall, approximately 100 pounds, with 2 distinct moles on the left side of her face. She was wearing 3 handmade Mexican or Indian-style rings. Next, the family's 50-year search for a young airman lost during World War II. In 1943, at the height of World War II, an American B-24 bomber on a non-combat mission went down over North Africa. The entire crew was lost. Among the victims were these 3 men: Sylvan Lazarus, Carl Cobb, and Bernard Brady. For some 50 years, they have been the focus of a perplexing, unsolved mystery. 3 months after the crash, a Baltimore newspaper ran this photograph of 4 American prisoners of war being interrogated by a German officer. Inexplicably, 3 of the prisoners were positively identified by their families as Lazarus, Cobb, and Brady. Perhaps someone watching can help the families of these men finally put their sons to rest. Christmas of 1943 was a time of sorrow for the Lazarus family of Baltimore, Maryland. On December 14th, they learned that their eldest son, Sylvan, an American airman, was missing in action. 3 weeks later, the family's worst nightmare came true.
Dad?
It's your brother.
He's dead.
Sylvan's brother Arnold was 17 years old at the time.
We were devastated, absolutely devastated. I mean, my brother was such a great guy. He was loved by everybody, very, very outgoing, family-oriented. And to lose somebody like that it's devastating. There's no other word I could use.
According to government records, on December 8, 1943, Sylvan and 13 other men boarded a B-24 Liberator bomber on the eastern coast of Africa. The plane was bound for Casablanca, Morocco, when it reportedly crashed in the Atlas Mountains near the city of Taroudan. Military officials reported that Sylvan Lazarus and the other victims were later buried in a mass grave. 3 months passed. The Lazarus family tried to cope with the loss of Sylvan. They never received any of his personal effects, not even his dog tags. Then on March 17, 1944, the mysterious photograph appeared in the Baltimore Mirror.
Anna! Anna!
The family's grief turned first to confusion, then to hope.
Come on, Samuel. What does it say?
Prisoners of Germany captured after their planes were shot down over the Third Reich during recent obliteration bombing raids.
We were shocked. I mean, there was no question about it that one of the airmen was definitely my brother. His eyes, his posture, the way he stood at a certain way, was definitely him, definitely.
Was it possible that Sylvan Lazarus had survived? If so, it made no sense for him to be interrogated by a Nazi officer in North Africa. The Germans had been driven from the area more than 7 months before the crash. Sylvan's father was convinced that there was much more to the story. He obtained the names of the 13 other crewmen killed in the accident and sent each of their families a copy of the photograph. Incredibly, Bernard Brady of New York and Carl Cobb of Cynthiana, Kentucky were identified.
My father wanted more answers, and he wrote back and forth to the government. My father even contacted the Red Cross, trying to get answers, but it was all in vain.
Anything?
No, nothing.
They were first told that the crewmen were all buried in a common grave at the Casablanca European Cemetery. Later on, they were told that their remains were dug up and reburied in Al Anan Cemetery in, I believe, Algeria. There was never any explanation given, to my knowledge, as to why the government did this.
I am not really sure whether the government or the military knows exactly what happened. I have my own theories. Unfortunately, I don't have proof.
The Lazarus family now believes that Sylvan's plane may have been shot down during a secret mission behind German lines in Europe, not in Africa. They also believe that some of the crewmen managed to parachute to safety, only to be taken prisoner by the Nazis. Sylvan and the others were most likely photographed while being interrogated about their mission. The Lazaruses fear that Sylvan may have been singled out because of his religion.
My theory is great possibility that the Germans found out that my brother was Jewish. And I believe that they violated the Geneva Convention. By rights, he should have been put into a POW camp. But I don't believe that that happened. I believe that he was put into a concentration camp instead.
See, Dad, this is from the War Department, the Adjutant General's office, dated January 24th, 1944.
Although it has been 50 years since Sylvan Lazarus was last seen alive, his family continues a search for clues to his fate. In 1990, under the Freedom of Information Act, the Lazaruses obtained the original crew list from the National Archives.
There were 14 names. My Uncle Sylvan, Carl Cobb, and Bernard Brady were among those names. And next to those 3 names were check marks and the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Now, I've never gotten an explanation as to what those check marks and numbers meant.
I feel very, very sad about one thing, that my parents went to their graves without knowing exactly what happened to my brother. Having seen the photograph, we cannot help but wonder what really happened to him. Couldn't have been killed in a crash. So what happened to him? That's what we want to find out.
Do our minds possess untapped psychic powers? Can we move objects without touching them? Can we communicate clairvoyantly with the dead? Do premonitions come true? Join me 2 weeks from tonight as we explore these intriguing questions on a special Unsolved Mysteries report, Mysteries of the Psychic Mind.